It's gonna be awkward.
Boom! What up?
Bazinga.
What up? What up?
We are back in the saddle again, and this is a no-numbered episode. We have decided for the solo episodes, just the two of us, no number.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't make sense to have a number because we're why?
We're just going full time. Yeah, it's kind of like a year-round thing. When you're not doing a season, it's like, what's the point of a number?
Well, it's going to be on a specific topic. So it doesn't even need to be in any order. Like this episode will be relevant probably 10 years from now.
I would agree.
Ultimately, it's just our opinion of the best music decade. But like, it's I think it's a good idea to not do numbers because that can make it to where people feel like, oh, they got to watch the latest one that just the highest number, or they got to start at number one and work their way up, and that's just
Guess will have numbers. Social Awkward with Friends, that'll have numbers.
Yeah, but for this, just doesn't need to.
Right.
So I like that. So this week we're doing best music decade, like I just said.
Yep.
Naturally, Z and I couldn't come to total agreement on what the best decade was. We both obviously like each other's.
Yeah, well, we were gonna go head to head with them, and then we just decided we just can't.
It's
can't
kinda
cram
lame.
all of it in. Yeah, and it's not about whose is better. So we're just gonna have the two of them in a 2-part. We'll have this for 2 weeks.
And to be honest, we did the whole episode, and it just wasn't good. We just didn't like it.
Well, we couldn't even finish. We would have had to do a whole another run in time, and we still were just like kind of rushed in at the end and like, dude, we missed all this other shit. So like,
well, I knew it was bad when, like, going into this week, I was so excited to do the episode because like I'm excited to talk about music and the favorite decade and all that. And it's the first time we're like coming with a little notepad
Notes,
and everything, and you got everything lined up. And then after the episode, I was still excited to do it, and that's when I was like, oh, dude, I shouldn't still be excited to do this because
we just did it.
And like I told you this morning, and
we're a little rusty. It's all right. I mean, we've been, we don't do a show like this, but we've been out for
well, it's such a different vibe than what we're used to.
Right.
Also with being out for a while. And then you were like, just look at it, watch the thing. I was like, yeah, maybe, dude, I'll see. And I just really wasn't feeling it. I talked to Shay about it, and she was like, yeah, as a consumer, I would probably prefer it to be split up if there's two. So
we have a J and a Z version.
That's it. We got a 2-parter, week 1, week 2. Mine is the 60s.
Yeah, so we're going to start on yours. We're going to go 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, great decade of music. I mean, and if you don't think it's a good decade of music, I'll say this, you don't know it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair thing to say. And I think a lot of people, well, first I'll say this too. The hard part about the 60s is that there's such a connection between the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s to where there were a lot of bands that started, a lot of artists that founded or got started in the 60s, but then didn't really get big until the 70s, or just had like one album come out in the 60s.
Yeah, well, and what's even crazier about the 60s is that like it's even spanned on to today's music. Because we were even watching something last night that we caught on YouTube, and we'll get into it when we start talking about the bands, but that's new hot artists that are like replicating the 60s music, and it's so just the chord progression, everything is so in your face, the exact same,
right?
That like it's crazy that it's just spanned on for that long.
Well, it was an interesting time from a whole decade perspective because the 50s was a lot more boppy and sock hoppy and just kind of doo-wop type stuff, and then the Vietnam War um, had broken out, and that really impacted everybody's view of the country and the government and politics and all this stuff. So there was a huge influx of folk music in America. Like, Bob Dylan was really delivering some hard hitting messages about labor politics and other protest songs. Neil Young, who's from Canada, but same kind of folk vibe where
Camp,
it's
yeah.
yeah, it's very about the working man and that sort of stuff. And then you also had, like, in the early 60s getting started was um, the British invasion,
Mm.
where you had um, uh, the Beatles, obviously. You had the Stones. Um, you have Eric Clapton. You got the Animals. All these people who are coming in the early 60s and influencing how music is being made. And a lot of the early ones coming out of British, especially the psychedelic British bands, like the Beatles, incorporate a lot of Indian sounds into their music, and that became kind of the staple of the British psychedelia.
It's cool because they really changed. I feel like you just said, they really set kind of the tone for how music was going to be played from there on out. Because it was like super doo-woppy in the 50s, and even the blues, like those British guys, they took blues to a whole new level,
Right.
and even mixing it with psychedelia kind of sounds, but it's also like blues.
Well, in out of the out of England, the England blues groups that you have are the Rolling Stones. You got Clapton. You've got the Yardbirds. And for those of people that don't know who the Yardbirds are, it was where Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page all were that was their first band, was Yardbirds. So they've had great legendary guitarists all along the way, and then Fleetwood Mac and Led Zeppelin. The biggest thing, though, that those bands did differently than other blues rocky type bands were they were incorporating old blues from bluesmen like Robert Johnson
Right.
and Howlin' Wolf and Muddy
Like
Waters.
Willie Dixon too.
Yeah, and there was a lot of sampling and a lot of borrowing from those sort of uh, sounds that then got overlaid with the modern technology and boosted up, and that's a lot of the sound that you hear with Led Zeppelin, really.
Yeah, and what's cool about them too is like what a lot of people probably
And the
don't
Stones
know.
too.
Yeah, I mean, even the Stones.
A lot Clapton, anything Clapton's been a part of as well. I
Yeah.
don't love Clapton. We'll get into it, but
Well, they really like Zeppelin. A lot of their, I wouldn't say hit songs, but because I mean their hits are hits, but
Right.
like that second tier of hits of theirs, in terms of mainstream popularity,
the next steps.
the next steps or the
Yeah.
deep cuts, even a lot of them are just covers of old blues songs from
Right.
like the 30s, the 40s, the 20s.
Yeah.
And yeah, the way that they were able to blend that with a whole new sound was
It was huge.
was huge for the game.
Yeah, and so like that in America, the big deal in the early 60s was still kind of the doo-woppy stuff. Where like like a lot of R&B and B and soul groups were killing it in the early 60s, like the Supremes, the Miracles, Marvin Gaye, Sam Cooke, James Brown, Otis Redding, and Aretha. All of those people were killing it in the early 60s and all the way through the 60s. But um, also surf rock was a big thing in the early 60s, like the Dick Dales, the Surfaris, and the Beach Boys.
Love the Beach Boys.
Yeah, everyone loves Beach Boys. That was kind of what made up like the early 60s, I believe, based off of what I've researched here. But then midway through, the folky stuff gets sort of combined with hallucinogenic drugs, and you start to get psychedelic rock, which is the Doors, Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Jimmy Hendrix, which like this is probably one of my favorite subgenres in all music. And I've never done LSD or any of those types of drugs, but I just love the music. Like the Doors has always been just cool sounding music, like a haunted carnival circus in hell that's like just it's interesting
But
to
it's like
listen
it's
to.
like
It's
yeah,
not like
really.
it's not a bad version of it. It's just like a
It's like what's arming you through it. Like it's like the music that's getting you through that scenario.
yeah, like
Whatever reason you're in it.
yeah, getting you through that shit. And like the thing about the Doors is Jim Morrison, who is the front man, had a lot of anger, I think, towards the way that the country had become, or what he had seen people do. His dad was a high-ranking military official in back in the day, right before Vietnam hit, and his dad was the guy in charge of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And the Gulf of Tonkin incident is or was the first confirmed false flag conspiracy deal by the government. Basically, they lied about getting attacked, and that is one of the starters of the Vietnam War. So Jim is not happy with his dad or the war, and so their music was fueled by a lot of that energy, which is kind of cool. And then there is obviously a huge conspiracy about his death, and he's a 27 clubber, and supposedly, but also too there's a theory that he faked his death and ran away. I'm not really sure where I err on it. I could see him being a homeless guy in New York,
Could too.
but the one of the rumors is that he died of a heroin overdose. That's probably most likely, but I still like to think that he's alive.
Yeah. Same.
But
Well, to trail back on their music a bit, one thing that's super cool, and I feel like it's overlooked. I don't know if it is for like super big Doors people. Obviously not, but they didn't even have a bassist. Like Ray Manzarek was their bass,
right.
and played melody keyboard. Like he was so fucking good.
Yeah.
And And then Robbie Krieger, what's sick about him, didn't ever use a pick. What's interesting about that is the style that he came from with the old gospel-y kind of music and very I don't want to say harpy, but a little harpy, to where it just added such a nice layer. But the fact that you're not playing with a bass or even a rhythm guitar, and he's just pretty much only playing like lead melodies essentially. And I mean,
Well, it was a perfect combination of, there was a lot of jazz in Ray Manzarek's organ and
jazz.
piano playing, a lot of jazz, and then there was quite a bit of blues coming from Robbie
a lot of blues
on the guitar.
and even what's our man on the drums name?
Densmore, John Densmore.
He gave a good, like, kind of nice bluesy.
It was bluesy but also jazzy, and then Jim was very folky and just kind of folky with the way that he sang. He would do these Indian, like, or Native American rather.
And then he would just start talking.
Yeah, dude,
But then he would yell, man. And the
crazy
yell,
thing.
I think that's what really started. I think he's probably the first influence for a lot of like the early metal bands. He had to have been kind of the.
I think he's one of the early inspirations for a lot of rock stars.
Yeah.
Like, when you think of rock star, a lot of people think of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, but they're still alive. Jim rock starred out decades ago. Like, that's
pretty rock star.
no, but he was one of the first. He was one of the first, like, rock stars. Because before that, it was really just, Elvis.
You know who started in the 60s was Thin Lizzy.
Yeah. Well, the big thing, dude, the other crazy thing about the Doors is that Jim died in 71. So they only went from 64 to 71 with Jim, and they were popular from the start. It wasn't like there was a whole lot of build up time for them to become the Doors.
Yeah, I got a few groups like that in my group, and I'm not gonna mention any, but some even to the point to where, like, they didn't get their fame until afterwards, And
yeah,
that was cool that the Doors, like, they really got to actually,
they lived it up.
yeah.
Dude. But yeah, and then in that genre too, you have the Grateful Dead, who, like, that band is so crazy because it's such a community by itself.
Yeah.
It's such a genre by itself as a band, to where they've had so many different sounds. Their first couple of albums were super psychedelic-y. Then they got kind of folky, and they were doing some country covers. And have just, like, they've
done really everything.
They're probably the best jam band of all time, where they just, you can go to a show and they'll play for hours. I've never been, dude, but Shay tells me it's an experience. So I'm hoping I get to go to a Dead and Company show with her sometime. But yeah, it's such a cool community in the way that, like, they're still so relevant,
Yeah, and, like, you still see, like, I probably see their sticker and merch more than I see really any other band, actually. I see more stickers on cars, like bumper stickers for them, over the Beatles.
Yeah, you don't see much over the Beatles these days. Like, after I think Rock Band ruined the Beatles for a lot of people.
Well, then you got to remember, dude, they took forever to get on iTunes. Like, they were really late to getting on iTunes. I think that hurt groups that chose not to go that route. Like, cause even Zeppelin for a bit, I remember growing up, like,
It Led Zepp again, dude.
yeah, dude. I first started getting in guitar, and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to get all these songs, dude, on my iPod, and all they had was a cover band called Led Zepp again.
Right. I remember those, dude. But like, yeah. Anyways, so the Grateful Dead, great band, but they ultimately they fall into the acid rock, psychedelic rock camp,
Right.
and rightfully so. But yeah. Then Jefferson Airplane. A lot of people probably don't know who that is, but know the song White Rabbit. Pretty much in any movie where someone's on some crazy drugs and there's like that build up. It was in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and when the attorney's in the tub. So, anyways, that's a good band. And then Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
You know, that's the goat of the six string. And he had such a crazy career. You know, like he started in England. He's not from England, but he started over there, and he was dating some chick who was also banging Keith Richards, and she got Keith Richards to give her a guitar to give to Jimi Hendrix, and so Jimmy played it upside down, obviously, and backwards and all about, and with his tongue, and you know did his thing, but also had a couple of epic battles and duels with Eric Clapton on the scene in England in the beginning. And then he came here, dude, and he was untouchable. But like no one really knew him on his home soil, which I think is really kind of interesting if you think about it. You know, it's like you live here your whole life, no one knows you exist, and then you go to another country and then you become a huge star, and then you come back home. Like, dude.
Yeah, I mean that's got to be crazy. I bet like a lot of like international athletes feel that, like soccer players and stuff like that feel
Sure.
that big time.
For sure.
But sticking on with the music, like on Hendrix in particular, I mean he I would say between him and Zeppelin, but I mean I kind of count Zeppelin a little more 70s, but granted I don't, because they had two of their best albums were in the 60s, 68 and 69. So,
Right.
but I would say between them, like that really kind of seals somewhat of an argument. And then even guys like Otis Redding, who he's one of my favorite soul guys in the Stax genre, is what they call it. And like just a few of those guys, and then like even Clapton. So many people consider him a GOAT, and
Can I talk about why he's not before we do our break?
yeah.
Do you have more that you wanted to say?
Well, I was just gonna say that like there's just everyone's GOAT, whether it's Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, or Jimmy, all in the '60s. So
yeah, dude,
that's
true.
very helpful for your argument.
That's true. Eric Clapton. The reason I don't like him is that he's a weird dude, you know, and a lot of people think he's the greatest, and also a lot of people don't know this story that I heard one time, from what I would imagine would be a pretty reputable source. The story goes that Eric Clapton wanted to get with George Harrison's wife, who is the guitar player for the Beatles. And so he drives his little home wrecking ass over to the Harrison residence, rings the doorbell at 3 a.m., drunk as shit. You know, they come running down thinking someone's trying to break in or something, and it's just Eric Clapton. Challenges George to a guitar duel, a guitar battle for the girl. So they battle for like 3 or 4 hours all night, and it was a unanimous decision that Eric Clapton had won the guitar battle, but the chick stayed with George for a little bit. Then Eric Clapton writes Layla, which was about her, and then it got messy. She left him for Clapton, and then I don't know, dude. It's not that any of my guys are perfect. None of them live in a glass house. You know, Jim Morrison's obviously got some demons. Jimi Hendrix wasn't perfect. You know, but fucking 3 a.m., dude, challenging another man to a guitar battle when you're Eric Clapton.
Dude, that is
Fuck off.
that is strange.
Like, dude.
That's a good idea though, dude. I might go over to like next girl I'm into that's got a boyfriend, dude.
Sure.
I'm bringing over Guitar Hero and saying, "Hey, listen up.
We're playing on hard,
Playing on hard.
or I'm taking your chick. One of the two.
You pick medium. If you pick medium and I beat you playing hard, then you got to block. You got to block her on everything."
Yeah. All right, dude. We got to do our little break, and then we'll be right back.
Okay.
All right, we're back. What were we saying?
We were talking about why you didn't like Clapton.
Oh, that was right. So we're on a blank slate.
Yes.
All right. So he's just a weird dude. I wanted to get back though to the folk rock scene that was starting to sprout up mid 60s, around the same time that the psychedelic rock scene was starting to kick off in America with like the Doors and the Dead and Jefferson Airplane. The Mamas and Papas was bursting on to the scene in a
It's
big
California
way.
Dreaming, if you don't know.
In a big way. Yeah, they have, well, and Monday Monday from the other guys.
Yeah.
Just a lot of really good
And
songs.
I mean, you could put mostly any of the songs in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah. In fact, they
They
had
used it
they were portrayed in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood too.
Oh yeah.
At the Playboy Mansion party.
Yeah.
So that was that, and then Simon and Garfunkel had The Sound of Silence come out in the 60s. So they make the list. And then Joni Mitchell, she's a huge icon for women singers, and she was a folk rock chick. So that was that. That kind of dovetails with the roots rock subgenre, and in there you get the bands like Creedence Clearwater Revival, who's, I mean, they're one of the most used artists in movies, I would say, like alongside the Rolling Stones.
Well, and they're a band up there with Leonard Skinner.
Well, yeah, but Leonard Skinner was a little more blues rock, like on a technical level.
For sure, but I'm just saying
And
they're kind of
then-
in that same camp. I was talking about movie bands, like they
Oh, I
get put in a
see what you're
similar
saying.
camp, like movie wise.
Well, what's interesting about you saying Skinner though is that the roots rock and the blues rock basically ended up being southern rock in the 70s.
Yeah, it all kind of morphed, I feel like, to one.
Yeah, because outside of CCR, you have Bonnie Raitt, you got Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, you got the Doobie Brothers, and then the Eagles, who didn't technically start until 71, but are a part of the roots rock subgenre. But I feel like when Well, I don't know. I mean, Joe Walsh brought a lot of Southern love into that sound. They probably fall into a Southern. They probably fall into a Southern rock camp just as much as they do yacht rock.
Mm,
If you look up the Eagles, I guarantee you it would say country rock and like Southern rock. I'll bet you.
maybe. I mean, I'm not. I'm not the guy to ask for genres. You know that.
I
like,
know.
I got a tight leash in my head.
I
My own
know.
leash.
Well, and then also you have Linda Ronstadt, who I know you don't know, but it's one of Shay's favorite singers, so I gotta say it. And then also she's an Arizona girl, so gotta give her a shout out there. And then the band, the band, they sing "The Weight," you know.
You would know the song. Went down to Nazareth.
Was feeling about a 12:30. Yeah, so them, but CCR is one of my favorite all-time bands too.
Yeah, they're great.
And so the evolution of roots rock and blues rock and what became to be southern rock
They had
is
too many genres in the '60s, man.
well, there's just a lot of subgenres, and there's
That's what I'm
so
saying.
there's so much different ways to like they were still trying to figure out how to classify everything back then, I feel like. And that's what you get.
And now it just all gets lumped into a
Pop.
rock playlist.
Well, pop or rock or yeah.
Yeah, depending on
Um,
what it is.
right, yeah. Let's see here. The blues rock though, to dovetail with that, you have Janis Joplin, who's another 27 clubber, and then you have um Jay Giles Band or Jay Giles Band. I'm not really sure how it's said. I've heard it both ways. But they got a few real good songs that you may or may not know. If you don't know them, you should check it out. Allman Brothers,
One of
fantastic,
my favorites.
fantastic brother duo. You already said them, but Leonard Skinner. I mean,
Everyone loves them.
everybody loves Leonard Skinner, dude. Even Neil Young fucking loves Leonard Skinner. Yeah, and they had beef.
Oh yeah.
And then ZZ Top was in there too. So a lot of that kind of sound came towards the end of the 60s and into the 70s, but you can't really say that they're a 70s band because they started in the 60s.
Right.
So that was why that was one of the deciding factors of me picking the
Yeah.
60s.
Yeah. Well, yeah. When you realize that they did form in the '60s, that definitely helps your arguing case for picking the '60s as the best decade. And especially too, because just like the influence, like it's got to be the most influential decade of music because, I mean, every '70s group obviously piggybacked off that.
Mm-hmm.
'80s piggybacked off it. '90s piggybacked off it. 2000s have piggybacked off it. And maybe less and less each decade as they've gone on. But I mean, like I said in the beginning of the show, there's still like a Billie Eilish song is what they were saying was the same exact chord progression in
People Are Strange.
the theme of People Are Strange by the Doors.
Hey,
So
speaking of the Doors and speaking of influential, you know that Jim Morrison was the first artist to get arrested on stage.
I think I did know that, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
he,
hilarious.
Yeah, they were trying to say that he whipped his dick out on the stage.
There's actually a couple really good, and obviously you
didn't.
know because you showed me, but
He didn't. He put his finger through the little hole.
oh yeah. Yeah, there's a few really cool documentaries on the Doors, which that's what made me a fan was watching the documentary.
Yeah. The one that
And
was narrated by Johnny Depp,
that one was really
called
cool.
When You're Strange,
Yep.
is very good. The movie's good too, though. I mean, I think
Well, watch
Johnny,
the documentary first. Become a fan of the band before you watch the movie. I'll say that.
Yeah, for sure. I think Johnny Depp didn't love the movie, and it showed in his commentary. But I think Val Kilmer did a great job, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so anyways, yeah, country country during the '60s is a decade of country that I'm actually a fan of. You know, I'm not a huge country guy overall, but the older back you go with country, the more likely it is that I'm gonna like it. And there weren't a ton of new artists per se in the 60s, but there were a lot of big hits that came out and a lot of influence that came from the 60s in country. Like Johnny Cash was the most influential country musician during the 60s, and he's obviously one of the most influential musicians of all time.
Right.
um I believe Elvis was serving in the army towards the end of the 50s, and then had come back in the early 60s, and then was doing some movies too, but still came out with some hits. And then um there were just some real bangers from, there's a guy Jim Reeves who people don't know, but there's a song called King of the Road, which I think a lot of people would enjoy. Patsy Cline has a song on GTA.
Mm.
But also just a real popular powerhouse woman country vocal.
Like that's one like I couldn't tell you the name of any of her songs or even pick out her voice, but it's a name I know.
Yeah, but like if you heard her voice, if you only knew 5 names in women's country,
I think I do.
and they're all old, you know, then I bet you'd guess which one's Patsy Cline.
Patsy Cline, Dolly Parton, Reba McEntire.
They all sound exactly like how their name is. Like if you judge them based off of their
Think of any
name,
others, dude. Garth Brooks' girl, she's a country singer.
Trisha,
I have no idea what she sounds like. I don't know if she's not older either.
Trisha Yearwood.
Yeah.
No. But anyways, back to this. Roger Miller. Oh no, Jim Reeves didn't sing King of the Road. Roger Miller sings King of the Road. George Jones had a lot of great hits during the '60s, and he's an iconic country musician as well.
Like a lot of them, like modern country singers have.
And then Marty Robbins, who's another Arizona boy, and was also a NASCAR driver.
That's cool.
Yeah, he had a real popular, one of his most popular songs called El Paso that came out in 1960. And then probably the only notable country musician that I'm a big fan of from the 60s that started in the 60s was Merle Haggard. And Merle Haggard recently, I think he died in 2017.
A few years ago, yeah.
Yeah, he really made it a long time, but he wrote the song called Mama Tried, and it's been covered a few times. Grateful Dead covered it. But he was actually in the prison that Johnny Cash first went to and did concerts for.
That's cool, yeah.
So one of the biggest things about Johnny Cash that was so cool was that he would go to prison, different prisons, and do concerts for the inmates. And one of the prisons was San Quentin, and that was where Merle was housed. And after seeing Johnny Cash, he was like, "All right, dude, I'm gonna be a musician."
It's cool.
And that was his life. But yeah, dude, I mean, outside of that, the only really thing I'm missing here is that artist wise, I think Deep Purple falls into,
yeah, I was gonna say them.
They're a real one band, like we're talking about the Beatles here, and we're talking about Most people just know of Smoke on the Water, but
Great band though. If you
a
get
lot
past
more.
that,
Like I forget that they even sing that.
me
Song, to
too.
be honest.
Dude, me too. Because I like Smoke on the Water. I'm like, dude, that's just like,
First song you learn on guitar.
yeah.
Yeah. But no, Santana.
Mm.
Santana got going and got pop in the '60s. I know he wasn't collaborating and doing smooth until later on, but um he was making bangers in the '60s. Make no mistake.
Yeah, I'm a huge Santana fan, dude. He's dope. So as we're recapping it, what would you what are like your biggest selling points on why the '60s is the best decade for music?
They just have such good
Since it gives the
roots.
history.
They just have such good roots on where music has gone, but to a degree, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that that the evolution of music has necessarily gone great, but they've definitely impacted a lot of musicians in a lot of ways, and a lot of music today. Um, you know, there hip hop wasn't a thing in the '60s, and that's a notable something to note, at least, because I do like hip hop, and you know, they just didn't have it really in the '60s. But the R&B and soul basically is what started the beats for a lot of the hip hop in the '90s. You know,
Even still,
so
to some degree, like when you get some of the old and in the early 2000s and stuff like that, like
yeah, I mean, like
even
you
though soul and R&B went in a different direction, like those old just funk,
the funk, yeah, dude. If you listen to some
like dude,
old funk,
Parliament, dude. When did Parliament start? Look that up, dude. In Funkadelic, because they're actually one of my favorites. I think they're
Parliament,
70s,
I think there's, I want to say '73.
but dude, Parliament, dude, go listen to Parliament, and if you're into guitar, listen to Maggot Brain by Funkadelic. That song is insane.
Oh no, they were formed in '68.
Ooh, that's a good sell, dude. That's a good selling point, dude. Parliament slash
Parliament
Funkadelic, dude.
slaps, dude. Yeah, they're
The mothership.
yeah. Yeah, so a lot of those groups really had a big impact on hip hop, and they were also such good pieces of art themselves too. You know, like when as we were going down that R&B and soul, that list really just speaks for itself. You have some of the most iconic soul songs that people still listen to and sing and
Right.
know that came from that time. And then a lot of stuff that people don't know has been turned into stuff that you do know.
Exactly. Like that's the thing, like it's
Like if you listen to some old funk and old soul, and you know Snoop Dogg, and you know Dr. Dre music, and you know some of this other hip hop, you're going to be blown away at the origin of those beats. You know, so um I think that's what's so cool about the '60s. And then also you have these events like Woodstock that
yeah.
became a staple of American culture. I mean, that event obviously over time has fizzled out as music has changed, which is sad to see. But um, you know, back in that time, that was no fire festival.
Right.
Woodstock was either we have to sacrifice our rep, or we sacrifice all this money, and they sacrificed the money, and it worked out for them. But ultimately, the show was going on, whether there were some issues with Woodstock, and a lot of people don't know, but I watched this documentary about it, and there were a lot of issues with the first Woodstock, and they weren't going to be able to corral people to pay to get in.
I think I heard that. Yeah, I think you're talking about that.
And their only options were prepare for this to be a free show or don't do the show. And they're like, I mean, we're not doing the show, so
Free it is.
yeah, whatever happens. And then it became one of the most iconic festivals ever. I wish I could have been able to like go and attend. I'm fortunate that I get to be in the business that I'm in, and I get to work with people of all ages. And I've worked with a lot of people who are from those generations that were at Woodstock and were, they were doing acid in the bushes, and they were just kidding. But some of them though, I'm sure were doing that.
Yeah.
The ones that listen to this show were definitely doing that.
Yeah.
Whatever one of my clients is listening to this.
Yeah, dude. I was gonna bring up a point actually, but
Sorry.
I kind of forgot. With the whole it was that like with the whole Woodstock thing and how the 60s, kind of had everything. I feel like it was really the first decade of music that actually kind of started to turn to more of a mainstream thing. Like we look at music differently now than I feel like they did back in like the early days pre-media. And what I mean is it seemed like it was more of like music was more of a gathering thing. Like you wouldn't never just necessarily go listen to it. You would just be singing together or playing music together. Maybe you put on a record. I mean, obviously I wasn't there, so I have no fucking idea. But from what it seemed is it just seemed way more sing-alongy and way more like singing old folklores or whatever they're called, and just like or old gospel songs. And even up until the 50s, it seemed like that with the whole doo-woppy thing. It didn't seem like it had really hit like everyday lives of people to where music became such a part of people's daily lives, because music, I feel like, really started to cater more to the emotional side of things.
It came into people's homes.
It came into people's homes.
It came into people's bedrooms, dude. That's I think before it was in people's living rooms, and then it started going into people's bedrooms, and that's when
and these artists started to bring out all these different emotions. Maybe it was in the bedroom type of emotion that they're trying to portray. Maybe it's an angry emotion like Jim Morrison.
Right.
So I think that's what was cool, is that they were able to bring in all those different elements to the music rather than just like, all right, we're singing along and having a good time.
Yeah.
Which there's some of that, but like there's also some like, damn, that shit's deep. That's real.
Well, speaking of deep and real, there's kind of a spooky theme about the late 60s, and it ties back in with Jim Morrison. And it's the 27 Club. We talked about it a little bit before, but there were 3 artists out of that came from the artists that I talked about, or that we talked about throughout this whole episode, that died at the age of 27. A little background on the 27 Club is there are a few members of this club who died at 27. They were rock stars that died at 27. You got, like people that everyone knows. Kurt Cobain is in the 27 Club, and Amy Winehouse is another one. But during the 60s, late 60s and early 70s, actually there were 4. There was Brian Jones, who was the original founding Rolling Stone, and he died at 27. Jimi Hendrix died at 27. Janis Joplin died at 27. And Jim Morrison died at 27. So it's kind of a spooky little club that, like, if you're watching a
Movie.
Halloween meets School of Rock, like I just picture the 27 Club coming back to haunt you. The 27 Club started when Robert Johnson eerily died at the age of 27, who is a blues man that we referenced earlier. And there's a legend that he made a deal with the devil at the crossroads. And
Well, here's a conspiracy about his death while we're talking about it. We got some time. Um, he was supposedly having a relationship with a woman on the plantation he performed
Mhm.
at, and supposedly they was like he died of, what was it, syphilis he died of? They they infected him, the owners of that property. I don't.
The plantation, because
Uh-huh.
he was getting with one of the
One of the women.
one of the women workers.
Yeah.
Robert Johnson was active from 1929 through 1938.
Very cool music to listen to if you haven't ever heard him. Like, it's obviously, it's just a guy and a guitar, but um it's so cool, and there's so much history, and that guy, I would say, is got to be one of the best guitar players of all time, just because of everything considered. And he played in a weird tuning format too, which was weird. Like, he had weird tuning, just not normal usually. And
He didn't have any training, like
no
he had
training, and
no, he was just a poor little young dude. And there was these blues men that would go to the whatever kind of store he had and would play, and he was fascinated by them. And then he would try to play the guitar, and he was so terrible.
yeah,
Legend goes that he went away for a few weeks,
went to the
and
crossroads.
he had gone to the crossroads and made a deal with the devil. And when he came back 3 weeks later, he was the greatest guitar player in the world. And the rumors supposedly had started because he would play with his back to the crowd, and it would frustrate these blues guys that were playing before and knew how bad Robert was at the guitar. And they're like, all right, well, clearly the devil's in his devil's in his fingers, facing the other way. Other weird thing about that dude, Jim Morrison uh had his back facing the crowd when he performed in the beginning.
Yeah, and then
He was nervous. Van Halen did it too.
Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah. But yeah, so overall, dude, I think it's the 60s for me. Um don't try to tell me it's the 80s, it's not. You can't say Michael Jackson. You can't make the Michael Jackson argument because he started in 69.
He was famous in the 60s.
The Jackson 5 started in 1969, and so doesn't
Well,
count for the 80s. Sorry.
ABC.
It's easy as 1, 2, 3. Which I don't know if that song technically came out in the 60s because they started in the 69, but
Yeah, that's cutting it close.
either way, dude, I feel more comfortable putting Michael in the 60s than the,
I feel that for sure.
you know. All right, man. Well, that wraps it up for part 1 of best music decade. I don't have anything else left to say. I think I've
Yeah, I've got it up there for one of my favorites. I'll say that, but it's
damn near covered all my bases here, dude.
you guys are gonna have to stay tuned for next week, where you hear my number one
Dude, you know who didn't get referenced at all?
genre.
You know who didn't get referenced at all?
Oh, you just ruined my fucking cutaway.
I'm sorry, dude. Pink Floyd.
Ah, dude, how dare either one of us?
I know.
Pink Floyd's phenomenal.
Well, here's the crazy thing. There's only one member of Pink Floyd that was active with the band throughout their entire go. And that was the drummer.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, because
Everybody else, and David Gilmour didn't come in until they started in 65, I think, and then David Gilmour didn't come in until 67. And
they were strange in the early days.
So, but like Pink Floyd is like a team more than they're like a band.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Anyways, that's all we got.
One of my favorite bands.
Me too. I can't believe I forgot to put them.
Well, thanks for tuning in though, because we are running low on our time here. Yeah.
Have a great week.
Have a great one.
See you next week.
See you next week.
I'm Jay.
I'm Z.
Together we're Jay-Z.
Cheer.
Ho. Ho.
It's gonna be awkward.
We hope you had fun this week listening to Justin's favorite decade of music. Stay tuned for next week because I'm going to explain my favorite decade of music. I'm super excited to do it because I don't know, I feel like it's going to be good back and forth, and I think it's going to be something that you guys can decide for yourselves at the end of this what your favorite decade of music is.
Yeah. Let us know if we missed anything for the 60s.
If we've missed anything for the 60s, yeah, let us know. And yeah, fact check us, whatever you feel. But I don't know. That's about it. It's all we got. And just
make sure you like and subscribe.
Get excited.
All right.
Peace.
I don't get it. You do the math.